Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Merci de nous avoir rejoints ce soir pour cette vidéoconférence qui s'adresse exclusivement aux alumni de l'Institut, notamment ceux du Nord et du Sud de l'Amérique, de l'Afrique et des Européens. Vous êtes plus de 140 à vous être inscrits à cet événement, dont déjà 80 en ligne à cette minute. Nombreux sont en Suisse évidemment, mais nous avons des alumni qui sont à Washington, à Salt Lake City, à Boston, à Ottawa, à Montréal. Pour l'Amérique du Sud, nous avons des gens qui sont à Mexico, à Lima, à La Paz, à Bogota, à Santiago de Chili, à Quito. Nous avons des personnes en Afrique qui nous suivent de Nairobi, de Yaoundé, de Lusaka, de Johannesburg et même de Dakar, de Casablanca, de Beyrouth, du Caire et de Ramallah. Bravo. Et puis des personnes également à Riyad, à Dubaï et puis plus proche de nous évidemment à Paris, à Londres, Rome, Strasbourg, Berlin et Kiev. Et puis je tiens tout spécialement à remercier nos amis d'Asie pour qui il est plus de minuit. Nous avons des alumni qui nous suivent de Phnom Penh et de Ho Chi Minh. Donc merci infiniment d'être tous là. Ça nous fait grand plaisir. Nous ouvrirons à la fin de l'événement les caméras de tout le monde pour que nous puissions nous voir et surtout pour avoir ces images de cosmopolitisme. C'est ce que nous représentons et nous en sommes très fiers. Donc, on aura quelques minutes où nous nous verrons tous et vous verrez que voilà, c'est extraordinaire. On a 50 chapitres aujourd'hui dans le monde, de nombreux ambassadeurs et puis en fait, ce soir, on se rend compte que tout ça est très bien représenté. Je profite de vous rappeler que l'événement est évidemment enregistré, que le lien vous sera transmis dans la semaine et il sera également disponible en ligne. Et puis, donc pour la prochaine heure, nous allons avoir quelques mots de Monsieur Burin, notre directeur, qui passera ensuite la parole au professeur Vin Kim Nguyen pour son intervention intitulée Unpacking geopolitics and international development after COVID first wave. Vous pouvez d'ores et déjà commencer à nous envoyer les questions dans la partie Q&A de votre écran. Et Monsieur Burin, je vous passe la parole.
Merci Karine, bienvenue à toutes et à tous. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous accueillir à cette conférence en ligne. Comme vous savez, notre institution a été affectée, comme toutes les institutions universitaires, par la pandémie, mais elle a traversé, ou en tout cas a traversé cette première vague sans grande difficulté et surtout sans atteintes de santé, puisque nous avons eu à déplorer 2 cas d'hospitalisation d'étudiants qui sont aujourd'hui en parfaite santé. L'impact est principalement évidemment sur notre fonctionnement, mais le passage au télétravail et le passage à l'enseignement à distance se sont déroulés sans difficulté. Le seul vrai impact négatif, c'est sur le chantier de notre nouvelle résidence d'étudiants qui ne pourra pas ouvrir en septembre et qui ouvrira au début de l'an prochain. Ce que cette pandémie, en revanche, nous a permis de découvrir, c'est qu'il y a des manières plus nombreuses et peut-être plus intelligentes de nous relier à la communauté des alumni de l'Institut. Et cette soirée en est un bel exemple, puisque nous pouvons de cette manière vous proposer beaucoup plus régulièrement que nous ne pourrions le faire par des visites sur place, des occasions de vous relier à notre communauté physique de Genève et de découvrir des enseignants que vous n'avez pas eu la chance de fréquenter quand vous étiez étudiant. Et parmi ces enseignants, j'ai le plaisir de vous présenter Vin Kim Nguyen, qui a toutes sortes de mérites, mais qui en a un, en tout cas, que je me plais à souligner, puisqu'il est à la fois médecin et professeur à l'École de santé publique de l'Université de Montréal et anthropologue de la médecine, de qualité, je dirais, universitaire qui font toute sa richesse et qui sont très appréciés par nos étudiants et par toute notre communauté. Vinh Kim Nguyen a été rappelé par le gouvernement de la province du Québec pour exercer à l'hôpital juif de Montréal. Il est un spécialiste de l'épidémie d'Ebola, il est un spécialiste des pandémies de manière générale, et grâce à sa compétence médicale, mais aussi à sa compétence de chercheur anthropologue sur les épidémies, nous avons pu, la direction de l'Institut, bénéficier de son éclairage dans toute la gestion de la crise. Donc, pour toutes ces raisons, cher Vinh Kim, un très grand merci et vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Philippe, for that very flattering introduction. And I'm really honored to have been invited to meet with all of you, the alumni, some of whom I went scroll through the list quickly and I know. I'm going to try and, I know that you're a very highly educated and intelligent group of people, so I'm going to try and not bore you by rehearsing some of what we all know only too well about this epidemic. And I wanted to go straight to discussing some underlying I think crucial social science political issues or issues relevant to the underlying social science and politics of the epidemic. So geopolitics and development, of course, we all know what that means. And I'm not going to, I'm not a specialist in geopolitics, and I'm not going to talk to you about kind of what the geopolitics are or the consequences on development. What I wanted to explore with you would be how we might be critical of what people are saying about geopolitics and development, right? So there's a lot of, there's a massive explosion in information that's out there. So having some tools to kind of unpack or look behind all that information and commentary and all those ideas that are circulating around the epidemic, I think might be useful for us. And I've organized around 5 points. I have about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to make 5 kind of very focused points. The first thing, of course, is that we are seeing different countries doing different things and all kind of looking to each other or looking back over their shoulders. So you'll recall that we had China, and then we had Italy, and then we had Switzerland, France, etc. And the epidemic kind of hopscotching across the globe. We all know that. And what we've all seen is that countries, jurisdictions have been turning to the last one in the line, in the queue before them, right? So the Italians looked to the Chinese, the French looked to the Italians, etc., etc., etc. So we have what I think is very interesting here, and I think we need to look at is the way in which political entities learn from each other about how they manage epidemics. So not what they've done, but how have they learned? Because this, to me, seems very new. It's very fast, and it's based on very ad hoc or informal connections. So basically, it's been doctors and public health officials communicating through WhatsApp. I mean, if I can just caricature it. So we've had this pattern of this hopscotching, and now things are coalescing, right? So now we have the epidemic is really, really everywhere. Didn't take it very long. It took 4 months, 5 months. And so now I think what will be interesting is to see how people frame what is happening in other countries to decide what works or what doesn't work at home. So, we can say, oh, America is a disaster because. So it's not the America is a disaster kind of constat or conclusion. It's how we frame why it's that way. So so there's a number of entities that come up that have to do with what the health system is like, political leadership, etc. But that's kind of all up for grabs about what it is, what are the kind of determinants or factors that are leading to these differences. And I think that the way in which people frame the differences and the learning is a tool of governance, right? This is the way people say, look, they did it that way because this, then we're going to do it that way. So here we have a very kind of curious experimental form of geopolitics, where basically what's happening around the world is used as a laboratory for informing local policy. So moving on to this question of policymaking, I think it has escaped the attention of no one that mathematical models and mathematics in general, which we do not teach at the Institute, as we all know, thank goodness, have taken center stage here. And mathematical models have led us down certain policies, have really played a disproportionate role compared to any other kind of public health situation in the past. And mathematical models, we are starting to learn, although many people were warning us, are deeply, deeply flawed instruments of governance and of policymaking, because they're based on, there's two reasons they're flawed. One is the model is based on what happened in the past. So it is unable, or it is not unable to predict what will happen in the future. It just says, if today is like a year ago, then in a year we'll end up where we were today. So they're history, in a sense. They're not predictive at all. They're used, their predictive valence, or the cloak of authority they have, are used to guide policy and produce change. So a mathematical model works when it actually enables you to make sure that what it's predicting doesn't happen. So they are tools of governance. They're not oracles, actually. And the second reason they're flawed is, of course, they're embedded with all kinds of assumptions about human behavior. And we've all heard about the British example, where the mathematical models that the British government based its policy making on in March did not even take into account lockdown or behavioral change. So you might say, well, what else could we go on? Well, we could go on virology. So the interesting thing there is virology tells you about how viruses behave, and it's a whole different data set and evidence base on which to make predictions. And I would argue the success of the Germans was that they listened to virologists and not mathematical modelers. What I'm pointing to here is, with this discussion of mathematical models, what I'm asking is, are we seeing kind of the evidence here of a broader epistemological shift? And I'll just leave that in a question of what matters as knowledge. Third thing I wanted to point out is that some of you will have certainly, I think the vast majority of you will have heard all these discussion of triage and ventilators, and what if there's not enough, and how will we choose, and so on and so forth. Thankfully, perhaps, this did not turn out to be the case outside of a few places in the Eastern France and so on. But what we're now learning is that there was a kind of a wholesale, in many countries, that certain segments of the population were denied care on the basis of a poor prognosis, so elderly and long-term care homes. The hospitals were protected, and the elderly were kept out of hospitals because it was assumed that they would just not do as well. So basically, people were not treated, and I'm pushing a little bit here, but treatment was denied to people on the basis that they had a poorer prognosis than hypothetical patients who might come in. Philippe is an expert of Nazi history. I find there's a bit of a eugenicist or discourse here. Let's do a little thought experiment. Imagine, we know that people who are African Americans are disproportionately affected by COVID. They have much higher mortality rates. How would you feel if we said we are not going to admit African Americans to the ICU because they have terrible mortality? So this is a very, very uncomfortable question, and I think it's something that's going to come up. So triage happened at the population level. We weren't choosing between patients. This one's young, let's use the ventilator for him. We're choosing between populations. I would also say something to watch for, and this is really outside of my domain of competence, but the question of what is real here. Is the stock market real, or is the economy real? And, or is it the number of patients in hospitals that are real? So all these claims about what we should do based on what really matters brings us a bit back to epistemology, but I think is something that has huge implications for how we will think about development in the future. Because we're talking about similar kinds of phenomena and debates over, the economy, how do you measure development, how do you do development, etc. And I think it'd be interesting, I haven't had time obviously, but to compare, you remember, the UN NDP and Development Index, gender and development, putting in soft, putting in more human indicators, I didn't say soft, sorry, etc. So I think there's something that's going to be happening there that would be interesting to pay attention to. And maybe just a final, because I've gotten up to 5, and I don't think I have time to 6, but I don't have time to go to the 7th. I think the discussion will be more interesting. Some of you, and you're Graduate Institute alumni, so you're young and very concerned about the world, and I imagine many of you have been very concerned about climate change. So, and some of you know that there's a whole, that there's a movement or a discourse in the kind of climate change concerned community about resilience and degrowth and collapse and so on and so forth. So this is a fascinating case study, right? Here we have what should have been, if we follow the dystopian films and novels, we have a case study of what should have been collapse. It didn't happen, at least not yet. It's probably happening in some places. But what I found very interesting is, in fact, how resilient, at least in the global north, our economy has been. Now we're learning a lot about what's happening in Latin America. There are concerns about Africa and so on, which I won't talk about because we don't know enough at this point. But I think this is something also to follow going through. I'll stop there because I think it'd be nice to have a discussion with you and to hear your thoughts. But as I said, I'm just trying to provoke some thinking around what we're seeing with the epidemic and things to maybe pay attention to. And all the time being, of course, very aware that this is just beginning. So and there's a lot of information out there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Wim-Kim. So I had a reaction from some economists here who said that they are studying a lot of models at the Institute, and probably we are waiting for some of their questions regarding resilience of economy. So Maria, I count on you. And I had also a question from Robert Cutler, who is a resident in Montreal, who would like to have your own advice or idea about the evolution of the pandemic and the epidemic in Montreal, and what are your prognoses for the future there?
So what many of you I think don't know is that Montreal, which is a fairly large city, has one of the highest death rates of anywhere. We're at almost 4,000 deaths for a city of a greater area, metropolitan area of 4 million, so it's quite high. 80 to 90% of those deaths have been in long-term care homes. And what we're seeing now is that epidemic is slowly extinguishing itself. I think the question of where we're going in this city is the same as in places like Switzerland or some places in the US, like New York, which is that we've clearly passed the first wave, and everyone wants to know, what will the second wave look like? That's what we're all struggling. We're all curious to know. I think the honest answer is we don't have a beep clue. There are mathematical models that show, ups and downs. Now, the interesting thing when you look at those models is they're based on the number of contacts you have, how many people you come into contact with, or how many people an individual, and it averages out over the population. And those curves shift dramatically if you decrease your number of contacts by 60 or 50%. So that is an enormous amount of uncertainty in those models. And they're not capturing, they're just measuring number of contacts. They're not measuring masks. They're not measuring distancing. Nobody knows what that means. So we have really no idea. And that's why I would say I think intellectually dishonest to have any claim to say, oh, it's going to be like that. I have no clue. The only thing we know is that if it starts again, community transmission, right, we have to go through several lifetimes, several cycles of transmission. So if it is starting again now, it will take at least 3 or 4 months. But of course, that doesn't take into account any of the things that have changed since January and February.
Thank you. I now have another question related to international organization. The current international governance system puts WHO at the center as an institution. But now all other institutions like IMF, WTO, etc., they are also doing some COVID policies. What is your opinion on that? The question is coming from an economist, Mrs. Sokolova.
Well, as a public health person, of course, and my predecessor and founder of the Global Health Center was one of the champions of this idea that health had to be in all policies. Health is a pan issue. It should not be a question of health ministries. It is integral to economics, economic planning, is integral to infrastructure, to trade policy, and so on and so forth. I think this epidemic is the first time that everybody has kind of seen why this is the case. When the HIV epidemic came along, the health in all policies idea, this was championed as part of the new public health starting in the 80s, but it all seemed kind of touchy-feely, feel good. It just seemed nice, to worry about health when you were building a building, but nobody really, it seemed very abstract. And now we can see trade restrictions, trade policy, and so on. These things are all directly impacted by COVID, and you have to have policies that address the impacts. So my answer is I'm smug and self-satisfied about these institutions, as any public health person would be. Finally, they're paying attention to us.
Thank you. I have another question here. How do you see the connection between the desire to protest about BLM and the imperative to physical distance? Will we see a shrinking of civic space and the right to challenge government in or action?
I've followed this with bemusement and concern that because the idea that you wouldn't protest because of the theoretical fear of infection, to me, is a political tactic. Let me just be clear about an epidemiological thing. So the reason we want social distancing is to prevent sustained, widespread transmission and, flatten the curve, decrease the number of people who are sick. This is a hypothetical benefit. So people are doing things because they want to avoid something possibly happening. People are demonstrating because of unspeakable things we've seen on videos, and because of very real things happening to real people right now as we speak, and that have happened under silence for a long time. I think it's apples and oranges. To me, there's you know, if people you know, if people stop protesting, I just don't. It doesn't make sense to me. I have to say. And if it's fine for Governor Cuomo to say if you protested, get tested. That's cool, you know. But that people somehow shouldn't. You know, people are wearing masks. They're being sensible. Yeah. So BLM is such a incredible moment for right now that nothing trumps what's going on there. Fortunate use of a term.
Thank you. So the question was coming from David Patterson. I have another one here from Mariana Rosales. She thanks you first of all for your words, and she would like to know from your point of view to deal with conflicting info. For example, how to deal with this kind of things. Masks are useless versus masks are required. The virus can live up to 3 days in metal surfaces versus just some minutes, etc., etc. How do we deal with that?
So the advice, that the reason that the advice or the information changes is because there's always new science coming out. One of the things, so what I did here in the hospital, for example, when we instituted our system of new wards, you know, the first thing we say is, look, the information is changing all the time. We're trying to give you the best information we have. So that boils down to trust. Who do you trust to give you the right information? That's a key question. Because the information will always be changing. So who would you feel more comfortable trusting? Personally, for me, what I tell the people around me is, this is a virus. Humans have been living with viruses for a long time, and we know the basic practices that are good for hygiene. They're good enough. So one of the difficulties I think that you're pointing to is that when we go to official recommendations, we're looking for certainty. We expect certainty. And the science will not give you certainty. And it's funny that in other domains, or when we ask our grandmothers, we're not looking for certainty, we're looking for experience. So I think it's a question of just good common sense. And basic hygiene is good enough. You know, I think that's, and you know, the question of masks, if I can just say something in 10 seconds, you know, people in Asia always wear masks when they're sick. And it's just basic common sense that if I have a virus, I am disseminating it as I speak. So if I wear a mask, I disseminate it less. Good enough.
Fair enough, yeah. So thank you. Another question from Sonia Pena. She's asking, among the things this pandemic has evidenced is the close relation of human health and well-being with the state of environment, nature, wildlife. Do you think the post-COVID will change our collective behaviors towards the protection of nature?
You know, one of the things I was thinking a few months ago, you know, when everything got quiet and people realized, oh my God, we can hear the birds and we can see, you know, we can see the mountains we've never seen before. I thought, oh, you know, we're all going to come back in touch with nature, and this is great. You know, it's not really what I'm seeing. I don't know. Actually, I was literally thinking about this today because we've you know, been reopening here as many other places. I was in Geneva last week. I'll be back next week. And it's incredible how everyone kind of snaps back to what they were doing before, even though they were happy in this new state. I mean, that's the impression I was getting this morning is, you know, the metros are full again, the buses are full. So I would hope, but I'm not optimistic.
Thank you. We have another question. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You have another question from Benjamin Wood. How do you think this pandemic will compare with past pandemic, especially the Spanish influenza during and after World War II? Sorry.
So with the usual caveat that I'm not a historian, but obviously the numbers. So the Spanish flu, as you know, there were two waves, and it was the main clinical difference, the way in terms of what it did to people, was that Spanish flu disproportionately affected younger people with strong immune systems to develop these cytokine storm or kind of autoimmune disease, and this is much rarer. So as you know, coronavirus or COVID skews in severity towards older people. We have obviously much more powerful tools at our disposal. We're also much more interlinked. So I think the honest answer is it's too early to tell. The danger, of course, if you will, I think an important difference is that we've done so much in terms of economic shutdown and social measures to contain the epidemic. So there's been much more disruption than there was, and of course that was World War I, so that was already a pretty disruptive context. Is it going to be better or worse? It's hard to say. I mean, so far it appears to be better, but it's too early.
Thank you. Benjamin, in case you are interested, I think there is a pocket lecture from our professor, historian professor, Davide Rodogno on this topic. We have now another question from Katerina Rowe. So thank you for your interesting talk. In your opinion, what is the best communication strategy to transmit the correct policy in the moment? If not mathematical models, what tools can we use to make the information reliable?
Communication, what we know from other diseases is that you need communication. The messages have to go through trusted sources. So you have to find the people that people trust and work with them. We know that interpersonal communication is much more effective than billboards and that kind of stuff. This makes a lot of sense during a pandemic because there's so much panic and fear that trust is really the key ingredient. So I think we know a lot in terms of public health messages and about how to communicate behavioral change. And I think what clearly we know works is when the norm shifts, when the group decides. So for example, when it's just seen as normal to wear a mask, a face mask. So I think we're all moving in that direction in different ways. The second part of the question was, I missed the second part, I forgot the second part.
So the second part is, if not mathematical models,
Right.
What tools can we use to make the information reliable?
So I think what clearly places that have been more successful have combined mathematical modeling as a tool to explore options with kind of reasoned empirical arguments or cases. So basically, what really matters is not which discipline you're relying on, but that you have many disciplines and that they are speaking to each other. So it's not about who's speaking, it's about who's invited to the table. It's about decision making, it's really about governance. That's, to me, is the lesson here, that if you need a broad spectrum of opinions and of dissenting opinions and of diversity across the table. So not just old white British gentlemen, because they will reproduce a particular worldview. And unfortunately, this epidemic doesn't, this virus kind of does its own thing.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you for the question, Katarina Rowe. Next question from Michelle Williams. Are these policies and or recommendations that you would suggest to ensure that the possible future vaccine be fairly accessible to people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and regions?
So so there are a number of mechanisms that are being discussed around trade and patent and so on and so forth, patent pools. The world specialist in this is actually my colleague Civic, who's been working on this issue. But I would say a few things that have to do with the hopes for a vaccine. It takes a long time to develop a vaccine. It takes at least 4 years, 5 years. That's the fastest we've done one. Even if we had a promising candidate vaccine, we do have some. If we were to test them, we'd have to recruit very large numbers of people and follow them for at least 6 months. If we had huge numbers of people in a trial, we could follow them for a very short period of time, but it takes longer to recruit them. So just mechanically, I don't see how we could have an approved vaccine or a vaccine that's proven to work for at least a couple of years, honestly, and then you have to make it. So, but then again, there have been miraculous, there have been things that have happened very quickly, but I think the vaccine is not around the corner. And I think that's going to give time to the activists and governments to innovate mechanisms to ensure global access. For the very simple reason, it's not because we're all good people, unfortunately, it's because if you don't have a global effective vaccination program, then you will have places where there's not enough people vaccinated. And so the epidemic will keep hopscotching back and forth, which will then drive up the number of people you need to vaccinate in your own population. So I don't think this realization has really dawned on many policymakers yet, or not publicly, but we really need a global response. Look at how quickly this thing moved around, 4 months. So we'll see.
Thank you. We have another question from Cynthia Bien-Aimé. Considering the shortage of GPs we are facing in Canada, particularly in Quebec, do you think the pandemic will encourage Canadian policymakers to change their regulation regarding foreign doctors practicing medicine in Canada?
There's been some talk, and I haven't seen any relaxing of those rules. For the non-Canadians, I think it's important to know that we have a completely nationalized or socialized healthcare system with universal access, but that physicians are paid largely, most of us, on a fee-for-service basis. So we're paid based on how many patients we see. What that means is that the less doctors there are, the more money we make. And Canadian doctors make a lot of money. We earn more than our American counterparts in specialty. So people think socialized and poor doctors. It's not the case. So the reason I'm telling this is that this is a very corporatiste or protectionist. Physicians are very protectionistic. So physician unions are the presidents of the doctors' unions are mafia bosses, basically. You don't want to disagree with them or they'll shoot off your kneecaps because a lot of money is involved. So unfortunately, I don't think the epidemic will change that. Doctors will always act to, most doctors will act to preserve their economic interests. So any kind of relaxing of the rule on foreign trained graduates is viewed as an economic threat. Sorry it's that way, but I mean, there's lots of things, there's lots of masquerade around this, but that's really what's going on.
Thank you. We have now a question from Catherine Mulder. Should MSF, International Red Cross, and humanitarian organizations prepare to have more doctors and health careers available to countries in case of a severe emergency sanitary situation?
Well, one's tempted to say yes, but I think this is something COVID will change. I mean, it's very clear that MSF had home country missions in Switzerland, Italy, France, Spain, Canada, right? It's very clear that this epidemic hit the wealthy North first, and perhaps worse than it did, at least until now, the global South. And I think, and I hope that we're definitively moving away from a colonial white savior complex model of humanitarian action. So I think the issue for organizations like MSF and ICRC is more about whether their structures or their architecture, and in general, the architecture of humanitarian assistance, which has always been predicated on this assumed sort of technical competence and wealth and protection, right, and safeness of the global North, sort of deploying people and resources to the global South. I think all this doesn't work anymore in this model. And climate change was one of the ones that was making us realize that it could happen here. So I would say yes, but I think we have to really look at the architecture.
Merci. Thank you. We have now a question from Brian Betton. Given the extremely high fatality rates in long-term care facilities across Canada, US, and Europe, what are the future ramifications in terms of demographics trend, health regulation, and the related costs? Why are governments not addressing this issue?
So I think there are three aspects to the answer. So the demographic shift, I mean, it's not so massive a die-off that the structure of the age pyramid will change. And to give you a bit of so, most people who are over 80 who get COVID are fine. Huh? It's just they have higher death rates. And here in the hospital, I had one week I was on, I had 300-year-olds who all survived and went home. And I was talking to colleagues in other hospitals. They say, it's this funny thing. The 100-year-olds seem to do well, probably because you can't kill them off. They've survived to 100, right? They're robust people. So the demographics, I think, will be, there's not enough dying to happen to shift the demographics. The policy decisions that led to high death rates were never taken as policy decisions. They were taken as sort of healthcare system management operational decisions, and their policy ramifications were not really explored. In Quebec, we discovered recently that there was a ministry ordinance saying that people with handicaps should not be admitted to ICUs if they have COVID. So I think there's going to be national scandals in several countries, Spain, Italy, France, UK, here, US, over what happened. What the response will be is not clear to me. Here in Quebec, our premier has talked about nationalizing care homes, but that's an enormous, financial commitment. So we'll see. But one thing I would like to say that I have not seen in the media is the people who are in long-term care are poor people, middle-class people. They're people whose children can't afford private care for them, or have to work and can't afford not to work, can't afford to keep them at home and look after them. So there's a tremendous economic inequality in who's dying. I haven't seen anything about that, but that's very, very clear. So I think that will also be something that will come up.
Thank you. I have another question from Vic Hare, interested in Montreal. Of course, all the alumni online who are based somewhere in Canada are interested by the situation there. What is Canada doing right or wrong in comparison to other responses? What immediate recommendation do you have?
So it's hard to talk about Canada because we have many different provinces. And I think what is increasingly clear is that in most places, it's a very local phenomenon. Clearly, if we want to stay at that very general level, Canada has had the advantage, like the UK, of having a centralized healthcare system or network with centralized command and control. So the minister can say, we're going to do this. That is very good for some things, the centralized decision making, and it's not very good for others. So it adds bureaucracy, it slows down responsiveness to emerging, to outbreaks or emerging patterns, for example, in our long-term care facilities. It magnifies the role of leadership at the top. If you have somebody very good at the top, then it's probably better to be centralized. If you have somebody who's not so good, you can run into problems. And we can see that very clearly, and I speak about Canada because it's what I know best, but I know there are other examples. The Swiss cantons would be also another example, where British Columbia had a very effective leader and put into place measures that protected the homes right from the get-go. Ontario and Quebec did not. And Quebec has done worse for reasons that are yet to be, or Montreal specifically, for reasons that have yet to be elucidated. So I think we need to be cautious about overgeneralizing because very local responses make a difference. So what makes a difference? The reason local responses are better is that the more local you are, the better you know what the actual conditions are on the ground, or for example, in the various places where you could get epidemics. So if your health territory has a meat plant and an old age home and a supermarket and a hospital, you actually know what's going on in there. So when an epidemic comes along that's spread by scratching your ear, people say, oh yes, over the supermarket, they have to scratch their ear before they go to work. We better tell them, right? So this kind of ability to have quick local responses, it clearly made a difference when you start reading around. The health authority that I work for, in which this hospital is located, for example, appears to have had a much better grasp of what was going on in its long-term care facilities than the one next door. So I would argue for decentralization, but with the caveat that we have to see what the various inquiries will come up with. Decentralization of it, the same reason that it builds in robustness and resilience. It like the internet. So there's no single point of failure. And in Quebec, I think we had a single point of failure that just dragged us all down, which was the response in the long-term care, the lack of attention to the long-term care homes.
Thank you. I have now a question from Kimani Godard. What are your thoughts on the RNA vaccines already poised for production by certain companies?
I won't comment because I don't know enough, and I think it would be dishonest. We'll have to see what happens. So you know, preclinical data is always it's very risky to make predictions based on preclinical data, as the pharmaceutical industry knows. So I'm not qualified enough to comment on the virological pluses or minuses of different candidate vaccines. But I always have something to say. A vaccine's effectiveness depends. What you can look at is the vector. So usually it's an engineered gene which is used to express the specific viral protein. So some of these vectors have track records. They're better or not at amplifying. So you can look at that, but it's very hard to predict this.
We have now a question from Ambassador Paul Garnier. Where will the tension between economic interest and health protection lead us?
Well, I think what I would answer is, where do the people who want to create that tension, where are they trying to lead us? it's a bit of an art. So, you know, it's, I can see where the question is going. I mean, I not where it's going, but I can see, you know, that there's been this natural tendency to see to see the tension between locking down and opening up. And of course, right, we had a pre-COVID world where there was economy X that functioned at level Y, and we all had a lifestyle Z. And COVID came along, and we protected or to reduce death rates by W%, and that economy is gone. So we see the tension, right? We had to destroy this to get this, but in fact, it's much more dynamic, right? We're not going to go back to that economy. We never will. It's gone. It's finished. It's over. So then it becomes very difficult to, you know, the question is what new economies are possible in a post-COVID world. So I think this stark framing, as we see, for example, in the US, is usually being made by people who are arguing for opening up in various ways. And the question would be really, and this is why I talked about the global experiment, is to see where we're going economically. So one final example, Sweden, right? So Sweden is often used as an example of a country that didn't lock down too severely to protect its economy. It now appears that they have higher death rates and their economy shrank by as much. So that, to me, is an argument for it's a false opposition. You try to protect your economy, it doesn't work, and you have more deaths. So why don't we how to do both?
I have a lot of questions coming, so I don't know how to deal with that because it's 54 already.
The charge is running low, so.
So I just want to underline, you were talking about triage at the very beginning. So there is a book, The Republic of Therapy, Triage and Sovereignty in West Africa's Time of Aid, that you published in 2010 at Duke University Press, and for which you had a prize, the Joël Grégory Prize in 2012, for those interested in the topic. I think there is a question about Africa from our director. So maybe, Mr. Burin, I will give you the floor back so you can ask the question even in French or in English, because I think everyone here is bilingual. So, Mr. Burin, would you like to ask your question about Africa?
Oui, j'aimerais savoir quelle est votre vue sur la propagation de la pandémie en Afrique. Tout le monde se faisait beaucoup de soucis à propos de l'Afrique, et aujourd'hui, les choses ne semblent pas aller aussi mal, en tout cas pas aussi mal qu'en Amérique latine. Est-ce que c'est simplement une question de propagation de la vague?
Alors là encore, je serais très conservateur, mais on voit ce qu'on rapporte en Afrique et que les chiffres sont bas, et ça semble être réellement parce qu'ils sont bas. On voit aussi qu'il y a des différences entre pays. La Tanzanie, par exemple, et je pense que vous avez vu, le président du Burundi est décédé apparemment de Covid hier. Les pays qui ont moins pris les choses au sérieux ont eu plus de problèmes, et les hôpitaux sont débordés, il y a plus de décès. Donc, de façon très hésitante, c'est très tentant de déclarer que l'Afrique a eu un succès là-dessus. Ce qui est plus convaincant dans ce que j'ai lu, c'est le succès de pays comme la Guinée, le Sénégal, qui ont connu Ebola. Et donc, vous savez, ça repose vraiment sur les pratiques. Quand les gens ont l'habitude, ils savent faire. Par contre, ce qui est beaucoup moins clair et ce qui est beaucoup plus inquiétant, c'est les conséquences économiques, notamment parce que c'est des pays aussi où les supply chains, les chaînes d'approvisionnement sont beaucoup plus fragiles, et où la dépendance sur la main-d'œuvre est beaucoup plus grande pour s'alimenter. Ceci étant dit, je voulais juste dire que j'ai des attaches très proches avec plusieurs pays en Afrique et ce qu'on me rapporte, c'est que ça semble aller. Mais on va voir. Mais effectivement, l'autre truc qu'il faut pas oublier, c'est que l'Afrique est un continent qui est relativement peu densément peuplé. C'est sûr qu'il y a des grandes villes comme Lagos, Dakar, Abidjan, mais c'est des pays où les gens ne circulent pas avec la même rapidité ou facilité que dans beaucoup d'autres parties du monde. Et donc ça aussi, c'est probablement c'est un avantage géographique. Mais ce qui m'inquiète, c'est ce que je lis et j'entends sur les réels risques de famine dans les mois qui vont suivre.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, on va peut-être ouvrir maintenant les caméras. Et donc, on devrait à peu près tous se voir. Vous pouvez activer vos caméras si vous avez vos caméras.
Moi, je vois juste les initiales.
Voilà, on voit les initiales, mais voilà, tout le monde s'allume gentiment.
Les gens apparaissent.
Exactement. Est-ce que Monsieur Burin, Monsieur Nguyen, est-ce que vous aimeriez dire encore quelque chose, profiter de la présence de chacun?
Je dirais volontiers deux mots sur la rentrée à l'Institut, parce que sortant de 3 mois d'arrêt de fonctionnement de l'Institut, nous faisons beaucoup de soucis pour cette rentrée. Et nous avons décidé de l'offrir à la fois en présence et en ligne, parce qu'il est évident qu'avec un public étudiant qui est majoritairement extra-européen, une partie de nos étudiants auront des problèmes soit de visa, soit de déplacement. Et donc, ils auront la possibilité de commencer l'année académique ou de poursuivre leur deuxième année ou leur année ultérieure depuis l'endroit où ils se trouvent et de nous rejoindre un peu plus tard. Ce qui est vraiment encourageant, c'est que parmi les nouveaux étudiants qui ont été admis, à peu près le même nombre que l'année passée ont confirmé leur venue, c'est-à-dire leur début d'études, que ce soit en présence ou en ligne. Et ça, c'est extrêmement plaisant pour nous parce que la plupart de nos concurrents, en particulier dans les pays anglo-saxons, souffrent d'une baisse sévère des étudiants internationaux. Alors, il y a toute une série de raisons. Je pense que pour les États-Unis, les problèmes de visa et le visage sympathique que donne du pays son gouvernement actuel peuvent avoir un effet dissuasif. Mais je pense que l'Institut bénéficie de sa position de niche. Dans le fond, les étudiants qui sont candidats chez nous le sont pour des raisons très précises. Et s'ils sont candidats en même temps à Londres, à LSI ou à Columbia et choisissent en définitive l'Institut, c'est qu'ils savent qu'ils auront à Genève quelque chose qu'ils n'auront nulle part ailleurs. Donc, d'une certaine façon, cette situation historiquement éprouvante semble confirmer la résilience de l'Institut en raison de ce qu'il apporte, de ce qu'il peut offrir à nos étudiants. Et je suis content de vous le dire à vous, alumni, puisque c'est pour les mêmes raisons que vous avez choisi notre maison il y a 300 ans, ou il y a 30 ans, ou il y a 3 ans. Et donc, je pense que c'est un message d'espoir et de confiance, d'espoir dans l'avenir, mais de confiance aussi dans l'importance de ce que nous apportons à un monde où la coopération internationale est quand même ébranlée, peut-être menacée. mais où son utilité et sa nécessité apparaissent quand même très clairement à une partie toujours plus grande de la population de cette planète. Donc, un grand merci à toutes et à tous, et j'espère bien que nous aurons l'occasion de nous recroiser. Karine va peut-être dire un mot sur la réunion la réunion internationale de cette année, qui est peut-être frappée d'une petite incertitude. Mais...
Voilà, pour l'instant, effectivement, nous ne savons pas quelle forme elle prendra, mais certainement, et nous l'espérons, que le 12 septembre, la deuxième vague ne sera pas encore arrivée. Que nous pourrons nous retrouver donc le 12 septembre, a priori sur le Simplon, le bateau de la CGN, mais c'est loin d'être sûr. Nous vous donnerons des nouvelles à ce sujet. Si plus personne n'a de questions ou quelque chose à ajouter, je profite de remercier nos interlocuteurs principaux, professeur Nguyen, monsieur Burin, merci infiniment. Et puis, merci infiniment également à Daniel Graham, qui est le responsable du service de la communication, à Melissa Iglesias-Vielat, qui est la responsable de l'événementiel dans cette maison. Et puis, merci à vous tous qui représentez ce cosmopolitisme et l'Institut à travers le monde et qui le fait briller. Merci infiniment pour tout ça. J'espère à très très bientôt. Prenez soin de vous et des vôtres. Et je vais rétablir le micro pour tout le monde. Comme ça, on va vous entendre applaudir. Merci beaucoup. À bientôt.
Vraiment.
Bye. Bye. Bonne soirée. Merci beaucoup.
Bye bye.
Au revoir.
Bonne soirée.
Bonne journée.
You too, Michel.